If you're switching your training programs every 1 to 2 weeks, you're actually sabotaging your progress. I know fitness industry has sold you some like muscle confusion programs or CrossFit with a high variety of exercises and constantly changing routines. There is a lot of like nonsense that you should constantly challenge your muscles but in a different way, but in reality you're not really making a decent amount of progress, or you can't even measure the progress that you're making if you're constantly changing exercises, and you can never really develop a skill of a certain movement very well. And one of the main problems of constantly switching the programs, you never really learn the movements that you have. So let's say if I have power cleans in my program, then next week I change that to whatever snatch or any other kind of movement, squat, which should be changed for whatever reason you think it should. We never really develop a certain movement or awareness on how our body could move. A good example would be when you go like squatting, you may not know how to engage your core very well, and that puts quite a bit of strain on your back. So if next week you come up and you completely remove squatting from your program, you miss a chance to actually develop a skill of squatting and knowing how to engage your body better through that movement. That means that your ability to engage with certain muscles while doing squat actually suffers. And long term down the road, your progress is also suffering because you haven't really developed any movement patterns properly, or you haven't learned how to engage muscles properly. But there's more to that. By constantly changing training plans, you're also very unlikely to develop a good training structure. So if you're kind of constantly doing whatever you want, it's very unlikely that you'll stick to like the good old day, Monday chest day and things like that. So you're not really following a structure or a plan that leads to a certain fitness goal. Let's say if you want to get stronger in squat or deadlift, you will have to master that movement and do it for 3, 6, or maybe even 12 months until you master the movement, which means you'll have to follow a structured, progressive overload plan, which actually increases in intensity over a 3, 6, 12-week period, depending on who you did your plan, or maybe you pulled a random plan from the internet. It doesn't matter, but you should be following a strength training routine for somewhere in between 6 to 12 weeks or even longer before you even consider you changing that. Because our body generally takes 4 to 6 weeks to adapt to a program until you need to make some changes. And those changes doesn't necessarily mean that you have to completely change the exercise. You can just change like how much weight you have, like you're putting on, how much rest you're having in between. You may superset some of these exercises to increase intensity, but program fundamentally doesn't change like all the movements and whole routine. And I know it does sound very boring compared to whatever you see on internet, like influencers doing whatever they feel like. Or it may just look that way, that influencers are doing whatever they feel like. Probably behind the scenes, some of them are following a very well-structured training program, and they just put some highlights or some nonsense on the internet. And by doing that, they do make look training exciting. And I think in the way it's a win, but it also creates some bad things alongside that, because we have a bit of a problem in the fitness industry. We need to make exercise more attractive for everyone, like everyday people. However, this is the topic for another video. And what I'm talking about with training routines, you're probably thinking by now, Mody, like following the same training routine is kind of boring. Well, I think if we look into every other aspect of your life, you'll find yourself doing boring things because you have to. You have to wake up, you have to drive to work, you have to do same repetitive tasks at work. And yeah, this sounds boring and not exciting, but to get a promotion, you need to go to work and do those boring tasks and actually excel and shine with them. So same thing with your body. You will have to go through like a fairly repetitive program, and saying that it's not gonna be boring. Come on, like you can actually increase the weight, and that's like very satisfying. So if I lift 150 kilogram deadlift this week and I can do 152 and a half next week, that's amazing. I made a tiny bit of progress. I got a little bit stronger, even though the workout routine is roughly similar, but I'm making progress and it's not necessarily that boring. But if you do find it boring and you want to change the routine every single time, you have to understand that you will not make an optimal amount of progress. And that's why I'm trying to explain that strength training and strength is actually built through repetition and consistency, not necessarily through making a constant changes in your programs. By constantly changing routines, you also reset the central nervous system adaptation, and CNS adaptations is actually that's what helps you to learn how to engage more muscles in your body and get some strength progress. Beginners is a very good example of that. Most of the initial strength gains are not necessarily happening in the beginners, people who just start training. It doesn't necessarily happen because they started building the muscle really quickly. Their initial strength gains are happening due to people learning how to engage with their muscles a little bit better. And that's where your central nervous system comes in to help, because it connects your brain to your muscles to learn how to engage them. So how to solve all these problems? Well, stick to your training plan for 8 to 12 weeks. 6 weeks should be the minimum. Then make sure you're tracking your reps, the weight that you're doing, your sets, your training volume ideally, and there's plenty of online apps to do that. Also, make sure you're tracking your recovery, because that will help you to see why you're not necessarily feeling stronger or getting stronger. Sometimes you may just be a little bit under recovered. And one of the key solutions to actually changing your program constantly, make sure that you only change your program when you stop progressing, which means that you're not increasing weight or your muscle stops growing or adapting. So that's the only time you should really change program. And that will take, like I said before, 6 to 12 weeks for your body to start adapting. And to keep adapting, you also need to remember to plan some progression from your training program. So the changes can come from slightly increasing the weight every single week on the same exercise that you're doing. And that's enough to cause a little bit more stress on your body so it can adapt again. And if you feel like you need a little bit of novelty in your training, then I would highly suggest to add that novelty in your warm-ups and practice some new movements or whatever you feel like fancy doing. And maybe you want to do like a very interesting AMRAP routine, like from CrossFit. So try to do that on a separate day ideally, or maybe at the end of the session if going to the gym is a little bit inconvenient. So at least you maintain the main kind of structure of your program. You're following a certain plan to make sure that you're progressing, and then you add a little bit of novelty either in the warm-ups or in the finishers of your workouts to keep that satisfaction of constant change. And look, I am no different, and I've been going through same ideas of constantly changing the programs. I personally picked that up from CrossFit. If I remember correctly, the quote was constantly varied movement at higher intensity. So I just took it for granted. It means changing what you're doing in the gym every day. And that allowed me to keep myself somewhat fit, but I never really made a significant strength progress or any significant changes in my body, because it was like very like mix and match, very unorganized training, and at the same time very undisciplined. It obviously some other issues come alongside that, but I only started noticing some serious strength gains when I started doing weightlifting, and weightlifting uh, puts the programming into perspective for me. So, for example, I would have to follow the same clean and jerk or snatch program for 3 months because I have to get better at that movement. I have to get stronger at squats or deadlift, depends where I was lacking at that time. And that would put me into 3 months structured program, which is only varied by the amount of weight that I'm lifting or the amount of reps that I'm doing. But yes, it was a little bit boring, but I somehow enjoyed that because it gave me a clear structure and I could clearly see the progress that I'm making. And if you're struggling to build yourself a good strength training routine, let me know down in the comments and I would like to help you out to build a good strength training routine which constantly keeps you progressing and cuts all the nonsense that you see through influencers. So if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you will enjoy this one. So go and watch it and I'll see you in the next one.